Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Westwood School Committee's meeting of February 9th. Welcome, everybody. We're going to first of all start off by a pledge of allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. First of all, I'd like to announce that this will, in recognition of the Westwood Media Center, which is live streaming the program tonight, it's also being recorded for later viewing on its platform. And particularly want to thank Belinda Garfield and Charlotte Lynch for all the work they do behind the scenes to make these things available. We're starting off, first of all, with our superintendent's report. Emily?
Great, thank you. So I'm actually going to start tonight by turning it over to Lama because she's going to talk a little bit about the Q2 financial report.
Thank you. So you've received a report in your packets that provides an update on where we stand now with the second quarter of the fiscal year. As of January 1st, it's not quite today, but as of January 1st, we were 2.8%. We were spending at a faster rate than we were last year. So we're spending at 2.8% faster than we were spent last year at this time in the year. And that translates to roughly $1.4 million over budget. I know you've heard this before. We've been foreshadowing this issue in prior school committee meetings. But I just want to highlight a few elements of this report. So first, in terms of salary lines, there isn't a lot that was surprising as I ran the data. Probably the only important thing to note here is that student services, that budget is being spent and depleted at a slightly lower rate than we would expect, and that's indicative of all the vacancies that we are seeing in student services, particularly in support positions. And the flip side of that story is that we do see in the student services contract line that we are over budget, and we're seeing a deficit in student services contracts of about $367,000 as of this midpoint in the year. So we've spoken to this before. We've had to hire contractors, and it's at a higher cost often than what we would have been able to do in-house because we are absorbing the administrative costs of the contractor when we employ those employees. So that's there for salary line issues. Continuing along with other contract lines that we're observing are over budget. I just want to note that facilities is over budget in its maintenance contract lines. That's not really atypical at this time of year. We're going to continue to monitor it. If we notice that facilities is going to be significantly over budget, especially as we see winter expenses and spring expenses, we can shift some of the expenses that have hit those lines to capital, and especially those expenses that are, replacements of big HVAC items. These are typically actions I take as I close the fiscal year. So that's a measure that is available to us. The other budget that's slightly over is in curriculum and instruction. I'm not worried about that because in the lines where we are over, we already have designated other budget lines that we won't be spending to offset the overage. And the sources of the overage are well understood. So one of them was an increase in summer costs related to summer programming at the middle school, and the other is subscriptions. We've talked about that, and we've budgeted for that in FY’24. So those are the issues in contract lines. I just want to note, above all, the biggest non-salary expense area that we are facing is that we are over in tuitions, and the estimate is $1.1 million over in tuitions and student services budget. Again, we've talked about this a lot in prior school committee meetings, so this is not the first time we are hearing this. The good news is that we've got sufficient reserves, and it happens that our reserves are strongest in areas that we can use for student services. So we have a special education reserve specifically designated for unbudgeted student services costs that would be able to absorb much of the tuition overage, and we also have some grant funding that we carried from last year. Between those two, we have more than what we need for the current deficit that we're seeing in the tuitions. And again, what's helpful here is that those funds are earmarked only for special education, and it happens that the deficit is in special education as well, so they align. That's a fortunate outcome given where we are in the fiscal year. So that puts me at ease, but I will continue to be monitoring the budget. And as we look forward to the spring, some of the things I'm looking at most closely are long-term leaves and the impacts of those we always have staff that are taking leaves, but sometimes it happens just by circumstance that we have more than other years. So we'll be watching that this spring. We'll also be looking at heating fuel costs very closely and at any other unbudgeted expenses that may arise, including potential vacancies that we discover this spring that we're not able to fill. Those vacancies we always try to fill in student services in particular, and we may have to resort to contractors again if we're not able to fill them promptly. So those are the issues. As I monitor the spring, I want to flag that we are slowing down spending already. I mentioned that in my memo, and since writing the memo, I've sent out a message to cost centers and forecasted that we're going to be freezing budgets and really only, allowing purchases on a case-by-case basis after March 10th. So that's earlier than usual. We normally freeze budgets in April. So that's the Q highlights.
Thank you. Any questions, no?
So the reserve that you have between the grant and the special ed, it's about 1.3, a little over 1.3 million. The overage is 1.1. Is it, so we basically gonna go down to 200,000? I mean, is that the math about right?
Yes, roughly. We do.
Roughly.
I may have some opportunity to use other unused budget lines as we close the fiscal year. So I've already heard from the Student Services Department that some of the contracts they have encumbered, they might be able to release. I was told this week or yesterday that it might be 100,000 that we could release in contracts. Again, as we discover like at what rate we're going to spend with vendors, we may find money, and that might help us bring down how much we'll really use.
Anything else? Lemma, thanks very much. Appreciate you keeping on top of these things so closely. Next item.
Yeah, I'm
Emily?
actually going to, I'm sticking with Lemma
Still
again
good
for a
news,
second.
yeah.
So she's going to talk about something with
The other one I think
transportation.
is good news and interesting. So Westwood has joined with 21 Metrowest Districts in signing on and submitting an application to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for support to study ways of potentially electrifying our bus fleet. So with all the green efforts that are underway, I am excited about this one, and I think it's intriguing, particularly to me because I'm the school business official and I know how hard it is to accomplish something like this given procurement laws. So we're tightly regulated and we're not typically able to negotiate and plan ahead in collaboration with our vendors. Our school buses are contracted. And we go through a public bidding process, and so we can't plan 5 years ahead with Conley Bus Company, which provides our buses now. We don't know who we'll be doing business with in 5 years. So this is a creative attempt to try to work with other districts, develop a regional plan, maybe think about infrastructure or think about public-private partnerships and other opportunities for us to go electric. And if we're able to get the support, it'll be, I think, an interesting project I can update you on in the next 6 months.
Any questions? Any time frame on if it were to become reality? What?
This is
5 years, 10 years?
This is very early in terms of planning, but yeah, I mean, it certainly we wouldn't see a change before the next 5 years. We're usually slow to move, and this entails infrastructure, right? So either districts collaborating to invest in electric buses as through a regional model, or potentially working through a partnership with private companies to do so. So it'll take many years before we can see
Are
it.
there any other districts in Massachusetts doing something like this, or in other states?
We are one of 21 districts that signed on to this initiative, so we will be meeting with them and collaborating with them.
And are
to
there
pursue.
other groupings like this?
Oh, in
doing
the
toge-
state, I
yeah,
haven't heard of
yeah.
that, so this is the first one.
Thank you.
Great.
Any
Yeah.
other question? All set? Okay, Emily?
Alison, you want to talk about Student Services Director search?
Oh, yes. I almost forgot about that. So we have exciting news. We have 3 fantastic finalists who are coming in next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, to have boots on the ground tour of the district. And it's a nice feeling when you have the sense that you've got 3 people, any of whom are kind of very, very well qualified for the job. Amanda was part of the process, which was great. It was a really a big, but I think very effective team of people that took a field of candidates and narrowed it down to these 3 finalists. In addition to the visit during the day, there'll be a student forum during the day. So we've got high school students meeting with the candidates. They're going to be meeting staff members kind of throughout the day, kind of organically, and seeing programs in action. And then there'll be both a a forum for all staff who want to meet the candidates and a forum for all parents who want to meet the candidates. Both of those are virtual, so folks can get to them conveniently, and they're sort of compact. One nice thing about Zoom is we can have the candidates be back to back to back, 20 minutes apart, and really give everybody a good view of the people who are coming in. So, yeah.
Any questions? Just a couple of things, just to let people know. This, is it close to 20%, Abby, of our kids? Special?
Correct.
So these are special ed kids, 20% of our student body. So it's a crucial position, very hard shoes to fill out here with Abby, who's done a tremendous job with this. So people are interested, who have kids with special ed, please come forward and participate in this process, because it's a big part of our student body, and we're very proud to have such an outstanding program already. So please come forward and offer your thoughts on this. Okay, our next part of our program.
Actually, I have
Excuse
two
me.
other things, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, go
So
ahead.
these are related to things that are later in the agenda, but I just wanted to say to the committee, so we've reached a 3-year agreement with our instructional assistants union, as you know, and it's before the committee to vote on tonight. So I did just want to say that Allison Lemma, Abby, and I, we want to thank the IA bargaining team of Cherie Rao, Tom Wadekus, and Betsy Husted, along with their mass laborers rep, Nelson Carnero. It was a highly productive process. The IA contract that's in your package, it really represents a comprehensive restructuring of the salary scale for our IAs, which I think will result in meaningful wage increases for them. And also some important new agreements for how vacation days can and cannot be used. So, I just want to acknowledge that we recognize that our hourly employees are hit the hardest by the current inflation environment. And I think the outcome of this process is a document that's going to better position the district in terms of the hiring market. And it changed the starting hourly rate so that it's at or above $20 an hour, which will reduce the future need to hire some of the contractors, I think, that Lemma's talking about. And we hope it will help to promote our ability to retain employees that we really value and appreciate. So the settlement of this contract is part of our budgeted bargaining reserve that's used to settle all of the contracts. There are still more bargaining units, as you know. So we've already started bargaining with the ABA tutors, and we also will be bargaining this year with food service workers, so we'll turn our attention to that. I think in the new contract, the IA union made some significant adjustments that are really going to directly benefit students in the continuity of instruction. And I just want to say as a reminder to the school committee, and I think you do remember this, but that the IA union members really responded to the district needs for financial flexibility during the COVID pandemic, and they took a 1-year 0% increase in the height of that economic uncertainty. And I say that because they did not mention that this year in the bargaining process. And I just want to acknowledge that, we remember that. And that was top of mind for us in this process. So, and also I want to acknowledge that they were also among some of the first Westwood Public School staff to return in July 2020 to in-person work when we did that ESY program, along with student services teachers who taught in that program. And it was, it was some of the scariest times that we went through, and they were there to support our students, frequently in close quarters, wearing a lot of PPE. That's the nature of the work that these folks do. So, their dedication to our students is, it's real and it's appreciated. And I think the contract represents a shared commitment, both on the part of the instructional assistants and the district, to, provide clarity and consistency over the next 3 years. So I think, some of those folks may be watching tonight as you do the ratification vote, and I wanted to make sure I took this opportunity to say how much we appreciate the vital work that they do in the district. So you'll take that vote later. And now I want to introduce a student to you. So we're going to be discussing the FY’24 budget later. And we have Ella Allen with us here tonight, who you may remember met with Lemma to really advocate for something in the budget this year. And so she's coming to speak to the budget. But so Ella's a busy person. I saw her last night at the Westwood Media Center for their I Heart Westwood Arts event. I got to hear her play in a chamber orchestra. And I hear she has jazz band rehearsal tonight. So she's squeezing us in. We really appreciate that.
Director of Student Services
She
search,
was.
too.
Oh, and the director
She was
well,
Critical member of the
yeah,
DSS
yeah,
search
we
team.
great
It's like running the district.
representation.
At some point, you should sleep.
Yeah. So we're going to have like a brief foray into budget here for a second, and then we will get on with things. So I am running the slides.
Yes,
All right.
awesome. So hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. My name is Isabella Allen, and I'm a senior at Westwood High School. And I'm here today to advocate for something in the budget that I think is really important to our students. I am interested in having period product dispensers in our bathroom, as well as an annual expenditure to keep them stocked. Okay, so before going specifically and thinking about Westwood High School, I think it's important to acknowledge the context of this problem. So I have some statistics on the screen, but 1 in 4 students and teens have struggled to afford period products, as well as 1 in 4 students have missed class because of lacks of period products. And this is quite a sad statistic considering periods are natural and healthy for students. And these problems create disastrous effects in the lives of students. So first and foremost, a barrier to education, which is most important to consider in this committee, as well as a lot of physical and psychological effects, a contribution to the cycle of poverty and the inability for students to participate in daily life and things that they love and enjoy. One of the most striking statistics I thought, and this is from a 2021 study, is that students have worn a tampon or pad for more than 4 hours because they didn't have access to the products they needed. And that puts them at increased risks for infection or toxic shock syndrome. So bringing it back to Westwood, currently we have 2 dispensers at our high school, so, but they're, in my 4 years, I've never seen them stocked, and they're for profit, so it requires money, some change. So at this time, if you don't have period products on you, you would have to go visit the nurse's office. And for an educational system, that's very unsustainable. So I actually did some timing. If I was in the physics classroom, and that's one of my classes, and I needed products, it would take me almost 2 minutes just to get down. And I was walking pretty fast. And then not even considering time to sign in, time to speak with the nurses, wait in line to actually get into the bathroom that has the products, and then get back up. And that could be equivalent to almost 10 minutes of instructional time, which for most classes is invaluable. And while I have a lot of opinions, I reached out to several students at Westwood High School who I thought conveyed it really beautifully. So they spoke a lot about how that having products would foster a community where students can support each other and acknowledge periods are healthy and normal. It would also take away fear and embarrassment that they feel, as well as align with the town's values for inclusion and equality. So I also, in this process, I reached out to several different schools in the area who have been doing this successfully, and 3 of the school districts surrounding us that had the most successful programs were Weston, Needham, and Medfield, and some who are our neighbors. So I spoke with many different administrators and health professionals in the districts, and in particular, Needham and Medfield partner with AuntFlow, which is a company that I'm interested in working with if the budget was allocated to this. And these are just school systems we can model and collaborate with, which is super important to have a model. And I think the biggest benefit that we would have from this project is actually just reducing period stigma. And like this says, periods are natural and healthy and a part of life. And I think in society, and especially in schools, often there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation about periods. And considering statistics like 58% of women have felt embarrassed from being on their period, and 51% of men believe it's inappropriate for women to refer to their menstrual cycles in the workplace, there's a lot of culture change that needs to happen. And I think so much of positive change comes from school, so I think it would be really amazing to have them in our school system. So what I'm proposing from allocating money to the high school budget to have dispensers is partnering with the company I stated before, AuntFlow. I spoke with many different school systems, and the most successful ones partnered with this specific company. It's women-owned, it's a small business. And here are some different aspects of the dispensers. And they also offer an educational discounted rate, which is important in considering like some sort of mass implementation throughout our high school. And a little more about these products is tampons and pads, and I think as the pads actually have a really nice, cute little message, it's changing the world one cycle at a time, and I think, yeah, I think that's really essentially the core of this this proposal is giving people who menstruate at our school this feeling of dignity and this empowerment that they can go to school and they can feel safe and comfortable, and they know that there's products there so they can return the class quickly. And overall, the image isn't showing up, but that's okay. Thank you. I think it's something that so many students would benefit from, and I have a lot more specifics about how I think that money could be used, but in general, I thought I would just give an outline about why this is important for school committee to consider. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Ella.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments?
I think this is amazing. I think it's great. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I went to Westwood and had no idea that we didn't have these. You know, I just, this is a great example of student advocacy, and just thank you, really.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think it would be great. Yeah.
Thank you again for
Thank
coming
you.
forward and
Thank
doing
you.
all this work.
Thank you.
The student activism is wonderful to see. Dorian and I have had a chance to sit on the Legislative Council, which have all kinds of ideas for the school committee will be hearing, but it's wonderful to hear from the students, your ideas, and all the homework you did too behind it was wonderful. Any further comments?
That's it, yeah.
The next part of our meeting will be public comments. We encourage anybody in the public to come forward, speak for 3 minutes, identify yourself and your address, and we don't respond, we just listen to you. We do have something called office hours, where there'll be something coming up, we'll announce it in March, and it will be a daytime where the public is invited to come in and we exchange ideas with you. We talk back and forth, so if this isn't enough, please feel free to come forward and when we have our next office hour. So I'd just like people to raise their hand and come up and give us your thoughts. Please.
I blew it with the 3-minute slide again. I'm sorry. So I will, I'll give you like a 30-second wave, and I will try to not blow it. Hi. My name is Catherine Starziak, 70 Tamarack Road. I am a mom of a 4th grader at MJ and a 7th grader at Thurston. We moved from Walpole to Westwood when my eldest was ready to enter kindergarten. Both my girls went to the Hanlon School until we just moved across town last year. I am also a Westwood elementary teacher who has taught grades 1 through 5 at Downey, Martha Jones, and Sheehan. This is my 16th year teaching in Westwood. My family decided to move to Westwood years ago as I knew firsthand of its rigor, excellence, and how hard the teachers work to educate and grow students academically, physically, socially, and emotionally. From my work with my colleagues, as well as from my experiences with my children's teachers, I know Westwood teachers devote their time well beyond contractual hours and on weekends. They are passionate, professional, and care deeply about their students' whole well-being. I moved my family to Westwood as I wanted my children to experience and receive this top-rate education. And so far, they have. That said, I am beyond words disappointed and disheartened with the lack of acknowledgement and support of educators that make this school community what it is. More than half of the Westwood teachers have been dedicated to our school system for more than 15 years and depend on at least a cost of living raise. The ask for a 9% raise over 3 years is a very modest ask, considering the cost of living hike of over 13%.
The teachers' request for more time on the already embedded PD Short Wednesdays for the overextended special educators to complete mandated paperwork and reports, to actually have the time during the school day to teach children, not meet report deadlines, should be an easy solution to meet the needs of educators and students, a win-win. Pre, during, and post-pandemic, my children are experiencing increased anxiety and emotional health concerns. Their teachers need the time to collaboratively consult with the SPED staff, mental health staff, and general education specialists. My children's teachers need the time to meet with these experts so they can help my children navigate their increased emotional needs. Almost 75% of our community has invested their time and money into their own education, college, professional, and graduate degrees. We are living in a town surrounded by smart, accomplished people, and we choose to raise our families in Westwood because we believe that our children will receive a public education that matches or exceeds that of private schools while promoting diversity and a sense of community. I'm giving you the 30 seconds. Okay. School committee, please fight for Westwood's future. Please show that you care. I am appalled that the school administration and town select board is willing to cut staff, refuse reasonable requests for just compensation, and deny teachers' plea for time and resources desperately needed to address the changing face of education in the post-pandemic era. Our town is at a turning point. A small investment in the future can sustain us, or we can all watch the promise Westwood once offered fade away. I fear Westwood's stature as one of the Commonwealth's most prosperous and livable communities is sinking, and you have the power to change that. Make the hard ask to the town. Demand that our school budget needs more from the town. The community will support you, and our kids will get the education we have always wanted for them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Excuse me. Sarah Waterman, 9 Pheasant Hill Street, Westwood. As some of you may know, I have lived in this town my whole life. I attended Hanlon, Downey, Thurston, and Westwood High School. I have been teaching at Deerfield for 13 years, and now my son attends kindergarten too. I want to thank the Westwood Public School teachers for helping me be the person I am today. From Mrs. Patterson, my kindergarten teacher, who helped me overcome my extreme shyness and anxiety. From Owie Smith, my 4th grade teacher, who taught me how random acts of kindness will change the world. To Mr. Kulik, my 6th grade teacher, Ms. Donovan, my 7th grade math teacher, Madame Rice, my 10th grade French teacher, and so many more. And finally, to Mr. Jonas Scher, my high school psychology teacher, who gave me the passion for learning about how people think, behave, and learn. And this ultimately led me to become a teacher myself. I feel that Westwood Public School teachers are bright, compassionate, and student-focused people. They have shaped me to love learning and pass that love and joy onto the students I have with me each day. Westwood teachers are why I chose to live in this town, so my kids can have the same amazing teachers, build a love of learning, and become a citizen in this global community. I thank you, teachers. I'm honored to be part of your team. Teachers are the foundational part of what makes this town so great. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Well, thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate it. Don't forget our office hours where we have opportunity to discuss a lot of these things in more detail. Next items, we have a series of updates. First is chair update. I am currently the chairperson, and a couple of things I wanted to announce is that I've recently signed a document that says that I have been informed by Emily because she is involved in advising us on our budget. It's an ethics disclosure item that she has disclosed that we do spend money during the year with the educational cooperative for special ed kids that we send and get their help, and she will be working for them as executive director. So it's an ethics thing that we're informed that she is advising us on topics that may relate to where she will be in her next position. So it's just a formal statement that nothing is hidden and no one is unaware of that, and I did sign a document showing all the information I received from her, and I want to thank her for that. I just wanted to share with the school committee, because I'm not going to be around in the near future, something I found. I'll be hiding.
You'll be walking your
But
dog.
if I were around, I would be involved in this, but I found this very interesting, because we learned a lot from Wellesley when we needed help with COVID. They started testing all the teachers and students in Wellesley a long time ago, when no one could afford it at $85 a test. They are recently starting to do a very interesting study with gathering information that I think would be great value to us for their strategic planning on education. They've sent out a survey where residents around Wellesley can submit through the internet, graduates, kids out of school, parents, with a lot of very valuable information. So I just wanted to share that with you. Look at it maybe with the next superintendent. You could think of, would these be valuable information for us to have? Information from former graduates, what they thought of the educational system, what could be done to improve on it, how are they measuring equity? So it's just, I think, a very creative way to get information to help school committees in making the decisions you have to make. So I just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was very impressive. So I'm going to be in my comments at that. I'd like to move on to the school committee building update for our great school committee planning group that's dealing with the school building project.
Thanks, Charlie. One of these days I will remember to bring pictures. The building is going up, and it's looking like a real building. I think Josh and Matt, you were there, Matt, right? I think they had the pleasure of touring it. I don't know if you want to give a quick summary of what it was like.
I mean, it's incredible to see the progress that they've made, and we started off in Mr. Ballmer's office, and to just kind of grasp and see what it looks like. Even right now, while they're still in the midst of it, it's just a beautiful footprint, beautiful building, and I'm jealous of Josh's.
Yeah, so it's looking really good, and we are so far still on schedule and on budget, knocking on every piece of wood we can find. And the Permanent Building Committee is doing a great job of leading us through this. We have some exciting news about the project. As you know, we are consolidating Hanlon and Deerfield, and we're referring to it as the Hanlon project and then the Hanlon-Deerfield project. And what we've decided is that in the spirit of consolidation and really trying to bring two communities into one, that we think the school could benefit from maybe a new name. And so we are asking all of Westwood we're crowdsourcing suggestions for names. And the way the process is going to work is I think next week we'll be sending out a district-wide letter that has a link to a Google form where people are welcome to submit a name and sort of a justification or a rationale for why they're submitting the name. We're going to form a working group to narrow it down to maybe a few finalists, 3 or 4, we haven't quite decided. And then since the school committee is charged with the naming of all facilities, we will review them at our March meeting and vote on a name. And it could still be the Hanlon-Deerfield. It could be something totally different. But more information will be going out to the community about this. I think the principals at the schools are going to try and involve the students and get their interest. So we'd love to get some student submissions. And we're also going to put it out to the district, the community-wide. So we're going to try and get it in the papers and hopefully get a lot of interesting names. And we'll see what turns up. So start thinking about what we should name this school. So more info about that coming out. I think we're going to open up the name process next week, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and it'll go through around March 1st. And then we'll publish the finalists on our website, and we'll vote next month.
Any questions for anybody? Are we still on the same timetable for completion?
Yes, so we're still on schedule for opening February 2024, moving both sets of schools into it. And then at that point, once everyone is in the building, we'll do it during February break. Everyone comes back, goes to the new school. Then we start the site work to eventually demolish the existing Hanlon and build the fields and finalize everything, hopefully by August of 2024. So we're watching we've got some supply chain things that we're watching very carefully and keeping our fingers crossed, but so far we're on track.
Because you can't see the building from the street very well, I think we've announced before, you go up that street, what's the name of it?
Laurel Lane.
Laurel Lane, you can drive up there and around the corner and you can see the whole building. It's really great if you could want to go up and see what it looks like. It's a very impressive building, which someday you'll be able to see from the street, but right now that's what you have to do. The next Policy Review Committee.
Can I say just something before that?
Oh, yes.
It goes without saying,
Yes.
just Paul Hanlon was, he graduated from Westwood High School. He died way too young. Distinguished veteran, distinguished select board member, commitment to the community. So we will, of course, find a way to honor him in the community, and that will be kind of part of this process
Yes,
as well. So I
thank
just
you,
wanted to
Tony.
go without saying, just say something to Paul. So.
Yes, thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Anyone else, any comments? Okay, Policy Review Committee.
Nothing to add. We haven't met since our last meeting. We do have a meeting on the books for next Friday to get back at it.
So of the 1,000 pages, how many have been done so far?
Probably, I don't even know.
This is
We're
a
not
good-
even halfway. We are more than half.
Oh,
you
we're more
think?
than halfway done, yeah.
Okay.
We'll be done by
Feels
the
like
end of
we've
the
read more than 1,000.
This is a good way to retire school committee
It
members.
sure is. It sure is, Charlie.
1,000 pages of policy.
Amanda,
Every
if we,
one at a time.
if we have a question, you want us to just email, like?
Yeah, you can just
Okay,
send it to me.
right,
Thank
thanks.
you.
The superintendent search update.
Go ahead.
Mayor?
So we named the committee. It's there's 15 members. It's all on the website. We have a website that is updating on the search. We posted the job. There's probably the biggest thing that's happened since the last meeting. So applications are coming in, and then basically after the break, it's going to be a very, very busy March. Applications are due March 1st. We'll select with the help of kind of the search committee semifinalists, and then finalists by kind of the middle of March. And then that will lead to kind of site visits for probably similar to the process that they followed, where finalists will come on site, and then we hope to have the new superintendent selected by the end of March. So it's going to be a very busy March. There will be opportunities for, once we get to the finalists, for obviously input from the community, inputs from obviously staff, teachers, they'll come on site. Well, if you remember this process, 6 years ago there were forums, so there will be opportunities for providing input, and ultimately it's obviously a school committee decision. But more to come, very busy March, and I encourage you to look at the website and reach out to May and I if you have any questions.
Yeah, we did publish the committee name, the search committee names on the website. It's under the school, there's a tab under the school committee website, so we want to thank those people. We have a great mix of parents and faculty and staff and front office and even town people on this, and it's a big commitment, so we thank everyone in advance for that.
Thank you, Mayor Tony, for all your work in many projects, but this is a real challenging one. We're ready to move on to our discussion items. First item is the budget deliberation, fiscal year 24.
Okay, great. Okay, so at our last meeting in January, I presented the proposed budget to the school committee. And in a typical budget timeline, I would present a budget in January, we would take the month, come back in February. February would be the public budget hearing, and the school committee would vote, and then it would go to FinCom in March. However, tonight, I need to provide you with a revised proposed budget. And so for that reason, Charlie, as the chair, has moved the public budget hearing to March, because we want to make sure that members of the public are able to see the revised budget. We can do the hearing in March and take a vote then. So I do want to say a little bit about the timeline here. just to remind people that we're in an annual process, the budget development process. It has a prescribed timeline. It's related to the town charter, and there are deadlines that we have to meet, right? And so it's sort of a backwards planning exercise. So if you start with the red box, May 1st is the annual town meeting. That's when the town residents come to the town meeting and they vote the operating budget, which is for both municipal and the school department. Right? In order to make sure everybody is ready and well informed by the May 1st meeting, the warrant books are mailed to residents in April. And in order to hit that deadline, a really important date is March 28th, because that's when the Finance and the Warrant Commission has their final hearing on all of the warrant articles, and they take a vote for each article, right? They make a recommendation to the residents about whether or not they think they should support the article. And so that information is the critical info that goes into the warrant book. Okay, so we're sort of working backwards from there. So I'm back at the top of the timeline here. As you know, we have had ongoing budget steering meetings between the school department and the town. That's been a really important process this year because it's a challenging budget year, and the school department needs exceed what they do in a typical year. And so there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of advocacy, and a lot of work to get us to the budget number that we've got at this point. As I mentioned, we did the original presentation in January. Earlier in the week, the school department met with the FinCom's education subcommittee, so we had a good discussion. That's the group of folks from the FinCom who are charged with looking at the proposed school budget in a lot of detail and really kind of getting into the nitty-gritty with us. On February 8th, Lemma and I also met with the FinCom capital subcommittee, so a different group of people from FinCom who are looking at our capital requests, both our annual capital requests and those other capital articles. And then here we are tonight. Next week, the 14th, is the date when the school department is presenting the school budget to the FinCom. So usually the school committee would have voted on it by then. But in this case, I've spoken to the chair. We're going to present the budget without your vote yet. Then, as I said, we'll do the public budget hearing in March and take a vote. And then on the 14th, the FinCom Education Subcommittee presents their analysis of our budget at FinCom, leading up to town meeting. So that's where we are on this timeline. And, we're required to hit these deadlines, obviously, in order to get the budget passed in time for the next fiscal year. Okay, so I'm going to put this slide up again. I've had this same slide up for months, but just to sort of remind us where we are here. So we're having a very challenging year in terms of developing the FY’24 budget. And there are a couple of drivers. So first, we have increased costs that are due to inflationary pressures, right? So I have some examples up here. Our heating fuel costs, this isn't surprising to everybody who's getting their bills at home, right? We're seeing a 30% increase over FY’21. The budget, we didn't increase that last year. When we were developing the budget last fall, there wasn't that sense that there was going to be this big escalation yet. We've talked about our bus contract, and I just want to reiterate that when we say our bus contract, that's not a labor contract, right? That's a vendor that we work with. So we don't own our buses. We don't employ the bus drivers, right? We have a contract with the bus company. We negotiate that through a public bidding process. We identify the vendor and then negotiate the contract. So we're seeing, as are all districts, a significant increase in our transportation costs right now. So a 7.4% percent increase in FY’23. We budgeted at 3%, which at this time last year seemed very reasonable, right? We, for the second year of the contract, we know we have a 7% increase to deal with in FY’24. We also have a special education transportation contract. Those are the vans that transport students within district and also out of district. That was a 10% increase for this current year. Again, budgeted at 3%. And we have some good news that we did not do a 3-year deal with the van company last year in the hopes that we would be able to negotiate something better. And kudos to Abby and Lemma who have managed to do that. So we've got a 4% increase in FY'24 that we need to factor in. Second driver, we're seeing significantly increased costs in special education, and it's due to a couple of factors. So we have some unexpected and therefore unbudgeted tuitions due to students moving in over the summer, right? So we've had 4 tuitions that have moved in. And actually, since I wrote this slide, I would also note, and you know, this happens in schools, student needs change during the year. So we've had some students who have required out-of-district placements mid-year that we didn't anticipate. We've been talking a lot about this, that the OSD, the Operational Services Division, which is a state agency, indicated to school districts back in October that we should anticipate a 14% increase in private out-of-district tuitions for FY'24. To provide context, for the last 20 years, that increase has been between 2 and 3%. So a 14% increase is pretty staggering. And so we've been budgeting for that. I had said to the committee, I believed that this was real. I didn't think that there was going to be some kind of last-second relief. I will say, I did privately hope that it would change, but it didn't. So we got that information this week, just a couple of days ago. And so I'm going to pause here for a second because I want Abby to kind of update us on the information that we have now about that.
All right, so the bottom line is that 14% increase is official as of February 3rd and has been released to the state. So all the towns in Massachusetts are receiving the same information at the same time this week. So that predicted increase is no longer predicted, it is now formal. And as difficult as it was to talk about that this fall, I'm very glad we did because we planned for it and we knew it was coming. So I don't think you'll be surprised that every one of our private special ed schools asked for and received a 14% increase. So we've adjusted to that being an actual this week. That results in probably about $265,000, just that 14%. So that's just a very large number.
So that's 265,
Mhm.
as opposed to a 3%. Like, what's the net?
Oh, I couldn't even tell you, but it's huge. I mean, 200,000, 210. Yeah. So what I think a big important takeaway is that we really should reassess our relationship with our collaboratives. So the collaboratives, on average, are going to go up 3.5%. And that's because they're built out of this collaborative with public school districts. They're incentivized differently. So I think that they have been a very good investment and are about to continue to be a very good investment. So just as a quick snapshot for you guys, we have under 10 students who attend collaboratives, and what I would give you is just the sense of scale, right? So we spend with the tech collaborative $147,000. That's our plan next year, and that's like multiple kids. So it's just much more efficient. We work with 4 other collaboratives, so I just wanted to start educating you about them. So that's the Valley Collaborative, which is up north, Lab Collaborative, which is out on the 128 band, the Accept Collaborative, which is Framingham, Natick, that zone, and the South Shore Collaborative, South Shore. And so we have students who attend each and every one of those in different increments, and the financial picture for those is much more stable and much more manageable. So I wanted to share that with you tonight, and if you have questions, I'd be happy to come back and tell you more about them. But the Tech Collaborative is our most local, and so we have the largest number of students who attend that particular one.
Could you just speak to sort of the difference between the private day,
Yep.
like what is the scope of the private day tuition versus the collaborative
So
for SEC?
as of now, a private day tuition would be over $100,000. So it's 3 to 1.
And is the reason we we weren't always sort of going down the collaborative path because they were pretty much equal and there wasn't a need to look elsewhere? Or why haven't we done this before?
Well, we always do consider them. I
Right,
think
but-
we have treated them as parallel kind of entities and matched based on student and location and demand, like for a variety of factors. I just think the relative value of them has increased.
Yep. Okay.
Tremendously. So that's the situation for tuitions. We will finalize all of that math, and that will be what we'll be working with going forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we did, in developing the FY'24 budget, we budgeted for the 14% increase, and it is realized, so there's nothing to be adjusted there. The last driver is unknown salary increases. So, as you know, 85% of the total operating budget goes to salaries. We're a people-driven organization. And so with an unsettled teacher's contract, which is the largest portion of the 85%, both in terms of like numbers and dollars, we have to make assumptions for both FY'23, the current year, and that budget, of course, is done, right? Like, that money is real, and the FY'24 budget, because FY'24 compounds on FY'23. So we have to make assumptions in the budget development process in order to meet those budget deadlines. So usually when we're developing a budget at this time, the contract would be settled. And so it happens that these processes are happening in parallel right now, right, in order to meet those budget deadlines. Okay.
Like, sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
At what point is it in your first slide with the calendar that there's like a point of no return, right? Like we're sending it forward and we can't.
In terms of, well,
like
so
the budget's locked in.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so the bottom line in Massachusetts by law, school committees vote a bottom line number for the budget, right? So right now the proposed budget is like $54.1 million. Okay. That is the number that goes to the floor of town meeting. Okay. So that number gets voted by the school committee, and the FinCom takes their vote about whether or not they're recommending it on March 28th. That's it, right? Because then that number is locked in, it goes in the warrant book, and that's what gets put on the floor of town meeting. So it's a bottom line number. Now, within the budget, the school committee on an ongoing basis can decide to make different choices within that number, right? And that's important to understand. So for example, in the spring 2020, right, we had an FY'21 budget, and we were in shutdown, and everything was going to change, right, in FY'21. And so in June of that year, we made all kinds of decisions, right?
Staying within the number.
You have to stay within the number.
Got it.
Exactly, to stay within the number.
Right.
That's how it
Okay.
works. Okay. Okay. So, again, and this is just reminding folks of where we are. So the proposed FY'24 budget that was presented last month recommends a higher increase than in the last several years. And in the December school committee meeting, I presented a lot of information about sort of municipal finances and school budgets and funding sources to try to, frame up, like, what are the parameters under 2.5. And as you recall, in that meeting, we looked at what level services was, and we couldn't afford level services within, like, the framework of what money was available to us. And sort of based on that conversation, I then went back and talked with the town. We had budget steering meetings, several meetings, and good meetings, good collaborative meetings, but we really had to say these are our needs. And so, we have successfully advocated for a much larger increase than is, I would say, sustainable year over year over year, making the argument that because of all the things that we just talked about on the last slide, that this year is different and we need to do something for 1 year, right? And I appreciate the fact that the town has really listened, and those were some hard conversations, right? Because the folks on the town side have very similar pressures that they're looking at. They also are in bargaining. Other people are in similar processes, and there's one pot of money. And so when we argue that the school department needs more, then the town has less. I mean, that's kind of how it goes, right? So, so the increase that we're looking at now at 4.5% is, I want to acknowledge that it is a stretch, and I appreciate that. I feel like the town heard what we had to say about some things that we need. Even with the higher increase, though, the FY'24 budget reflects a cut to level services, right? Our level services budget would be something like, well, back on the assumptions in the fall, it was like 5.65, and it would be higher now. Okay. So, because it's a challenging budget year, the budget was developed using multiple strategies, right? The first thing is that we have increased offsets, and we talked all about offsets before, so in collaboration with the town, we have worked out a way to push forward a one-time IDA federal grant so that's related just to special education. It was COVID relief money. It's, I can't remember when it expires, in like 25?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so we had been hanging on to it so that we could use it this year in case we had unanticipated special education costs. We have certainly had unanticipated special education costs. It's an important strategy for closing this budget year, but we have worked out a mechanism with the town where we're going to be allowed to push that forward to next year to increase the offset by $200,000, right, which is like 0.4%. And we're doing that by using one-time money on the town side, asking residents at this spring's annual town meeting to provide us with a supplement for this year so that we can push that money out. As we've talked about, that will create a hole in the budget for FY'25 that will have to be filled, right? And we've sort of identified in anticipation of the Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation how we will be realizing probably some reductions, right, that will allow us to backfill that offset, that we're creating that hole for next year in order to get through next year, right? So, okay. So we've done some increase to offsets. We have also increased user fees. So we talked a lot about that. The proposed FY'24 budget has an increase of approximately $200,000. So we're basically asking families to pay some more for things like using the bus and for athletics, right? That was an important strategy to get to a balanced and reasonable budget. I mentioned already that we've really worked collaboratively with the town. I want to emphasize that again, because those were hard conversations, and I feel like we got to a good place. As you know, we have been making, in this budget process, our best assumptions about contract settlements, and I've tried to be really clear every time I've talked to anybody about budget, that the budget that was proposed in January was based on a set of assumptions that I thought were reasonable. And, you know, as I've always said in talking about budget, though, that if the assumptions turned out to be wrong, if they turned out to be low, that we would have to go back and we would have to look at the budget and make further reductions. And so that is what we're doing tonight. So the school committee is in a negotiating process with the WTA. You had made an offer. We proposed a budget in January that was based on that offer. It's clear now in the process that that offer has not been accepted. And so there is now a new offer from the school committee that is on the table, right, that's been offered to the WTA with increased compensation. And having made the offer, now the school committee obviously has to make sure that they have the money to honor it, right? So we have to make sure that we have enough money that we can honor the offer. And so that was what I was charged with, is to figure out how to do that, right? And so, you know, we talked about making some reductions in staff in January, and now, unfortunately, I've had to make additional reductions. And that's never really the direction we want to go, but it feels really important to have made this offer. So two things are true at once, right? We need to sort of grapple with that reality. So here's the proposed budget. And again, there's no more money, right? So it's just thinking about how we're going to appropriate or allocate the dollars. So the proposed increase is for a 4.5% increase. And that gets a proposed budget of $54.1 million. Again, if we're thinking about the budget, the school budgets are largely about people, right? And so when we think about salaries, this is a really big driver in that $54 million. Okay, so here is how the budget is sort of built, high level. And the columns in white that I've kind of grayed out the type, that was what was on the screen last month. And so the revised budget is now in yellow. So here's the important thing to understand. If you look at this line, increase salaries for existing personnel, right? In order to afford and be able to honor the compensation package that's currently under discussion, we need to increase the amount of money for salaries for existing personnel to this number. That's how much it would cost to honor that offer. And so this delta, we had to figure out how to get that in these other lines so that we could still get to the bottom line number of $54.1 million. Right? So back in January, I'd proposed a budget that had a net reduction for faculty professional positions of 1.5 FTE. FTE means full-time equivalent. And now the revised budget proposes a net reduction of 8.6 FTE. You can see that that's offset, though, because we're going to talk tonight about the fact that our strategy for accomplishing this has to do with restructuring the way that the model that we have for elementary literacy and math intervention. And so the reduction is offset by the need to hire some additional support staff for this new restructured model, right? So it's sort of a net here. But that in total gets us to the same bottom line of 54.1. Okay. So what are the cuts? And I will say, just to be clear, that I would never, ever put cuts up on a screen if we had not had individual face-to-face conversations with people who are impacted, right? So it was a hard day today because those conversations happened. So here's sort of the approach. The additional cuts result in reductions in all core academic departments at the high school. We had previously in January talked about a reduction in science and also in world language, though I want to emphasize that the world language position is currently unfilled. So it was a cut in the budget, but not a cut of an individual. And now this will result in reductions in each core academic area in the high school. That will result in some higher class sizes, but I think still reasonable. And it will not result in a reduction of course offerings, right? So we're not making changes to programs or what kids are able to choose. At the middle school, we have a reduction in performing arts. So that will change the co-taught instructional model for middle school chorus. Again, no reduction in course offerings or higher class sizes. And then, as I said, the third category is reductions of elementary literacy and math specialists. And that is due to a complete restructuring. We're rethinking the elementary literacy and math intervention model. That strategy allows us to keep elementary class sizes small, which was one of our guiding principles as we came out of the pandemic. So we'll get into some specifics. So first, I just want to remind you that the things that were on the table in January are still in here, right? So there's no change to this slide. Here we are talking about reallocating, right? So in January, we talked about reducing one elementary gen ed position and reallocating it so that we can add a special education teacher and we can expand the peer program. That feels like a very important and significant priority right now. As you know, this issue of adding a teacher to expand the peer program has been discussed in the last 3 budget cycles. It's been in the budget book. We haven't been able to do it, and we really need to do it. So that's there. Then, as I said, we have this vacant high school world language position, and so we would reallocate that to a 1.0 FTE floating nurse or nurse substitute. We've actually already done that, right? And we really had a lot of feedback from our nurses. There's been a big change in the labor market and a shortage of substitute nurses, and so there are some safety issues here. And we're really hearing from people about a desire to return to field trips. So we talked about that last month. We also talked last month about these reductions: 0.5 FTE high school instructional technology, 0.5 instructional technology at the middle school. And then we talked about some changes in support staff. So we're still proposing that, we need to add 2.0 ABA tutors. That's related to students' IEPs. And we're reducing a full-time high school administrative assistant. Now the part that's new. So now, in addition, the proposed budget includes, so in January we had talked about a 0.75 FTE reduction in high school science. That's been increased to 1.0. We are proposing 1.0 FTE reduction in high school math, a 0.4 FTE in high school social studies, and a 0.4 FTE in public speaking, which has been housed under the English department. And so I'm going to ask Amy Davenport if she could talk a little bit about impacts so that we can understand the implications of it.
Hi. So I thought it would be helpful to give you some high school enrollment context to help you understand the scope of so many cuts that are coming out of the high school. So this bar graph goes way back to 2006, which was the year that Principal Parks hired me to be an English teacher.
That was a good decision, Amy.
And it forecasts through 2028 based on current enrollment numbers, which will likely shift a little bit, but are pretty reliable as we've seen in the past. And so what you'll see based on this bar graph is that we really peaked at around 1,000 students for several years. We started increasing in 2011 and stayed really high actually until about 2 years ago. And we've seen what we projected to be a decline. I think that decline has happened more sharply than we anticipated initially, but it steadies out for us starting with next year. And so we will be at around 884 students at the high school next year. You have to go all the way back to 2011 to see numbers that are similar to the numbers we'll see in the next couple of years. So if you go into the next slide, you'll see a more detailed data set that shows you where that bar graph comes from. And so this year we're at 902 students. Next year we'll be at 884. And from there on out, we really are going to remain within like 860 to 890 students. And so we proposed minimal reductions in January because that large staff has allowed us to do what you were also able to do at the elementary level, keep class sizes small post-pandemic. The more staff we have, the more flexibly we can build our schedule, which is very complex and has a lot of different course offerings. And so that large staff really helps us to maintain that flexibility and keep our class sizes small. And now we're, facing a position where those were really wonderful luxuries, and we need to make sure that we protect what really matters and give back so that the budget can move forward as a balanced budget. So our approach to figuring out how to make budget reductions was rooted in these sort of 5 tenets that I developed in conjunction with my site council. So the highest focus is to maintain an appropriate class size within your school committee guidelines. The guideline for school committee is 28. We try really hard not to get there. We understand that there's a difference in the experience a student has in a class of 18 versus a class of 28. We are not projecting to approach numbers like 28 even with these reductions. And so I'll show you in a minute what that might look like next year. It is, though, really important to us that when we collapse sections of a course, we really prioritize the students in our building who have the highest needs. And so you might see a higher AP course and smaller numbers for level 2 Algebra 2, because we really need to make sure that students get what they need even when we have fewer resources to get it to them. At the same time, we know that if we're going to increase class sizes, we need to make sure that we have a really robust general education support system in place. And so we've started building out some programs that will be able to expand next year to support all students, whether that's through S-Block offerings or through small seminar-style courses. We'll be able to continue to do that work even with these reductions. As Emily said before, it's really important to make sure that we also have a really diverse and expansive course offerings in our course catalog. We've been doing a lot of work on our program of studies. We are confident we'll be able to continue to offer those courses and also keep expanding them, particularly in the area of civic engagement opportunities, kind of like what you saw happening before you tonight with Ella's presentation. And so I want to give you a kind of granular glimpse into the process that I went through with every academic department chair. So if you look at that top box, you'll see the actual numbers of our geometry courses this year. And so there's 3 columns for geometry because we offer that course at 3 levels. The first column shows you how many students we have in geometry, level 1, level 2, and level 3 this year, and how many sections of that course we ran. And it also shows you the average number of students per section, which is, literally just dividing the total number of students by the section number. And so if you add up those 3 numbers together, we ran 14 sections of geometry this year. And next year, based on projections, and the projections are rooted in current middle school and high school algebra enrollment, so they're pretty accurate, I think. And even if they're not, and we have more students who end up in college prep and fewer students who are in honors, what you'll see is that we will be able to really keep class sizes at a small and reasonable size by running 12 sections of that course instead of 14. The caveat is that class sizes are bigger. And we feel the impact of that less at the high school because reductions are distributive at the high school, right? You can't take 2 kindergarten classes of 15 and say, like, next year we'll just have 30. But I think it is still a great class size to have 20 students in a geometry class. And so that's sort of the sacrifice that we have to make. We would love to have kept the students in classes of 15. And if forced to do something different, this is a reasonable way to support student needs. The other caveat is that I've also shown you the median this year, and so that's like most classes, despite that average, ended up actually lower than the average, and that's due to that flexibility of the schedule because we have such ample staffing. And so next year, I anticipate those averages, the lived experience for students will be right there or a little higher, as opposed to right there and a little lower. And so we did this process for every single course in every single academic department.
And if I could just jump in as somebody who a million years ago used to do the high school master schedule, this issue of flexibility is really key, right? As you have fewer sections, it just makes the master schedule sort of tighter and less flexible. And so you look at these averages, and those are very good averages. I mean, those are very reasonable class sizes. What happens is as the master schedule gets less flexible, the sections don't split evenly in a master schedule, and so you see more what I call skew, right? So you'll have some classes that are 17, and then you'll have one that's 26. Right?
Yes. In addition to those changes that we've made across the academic departments, next year we also launch a new course progression for social studies. I know Assistant Superintendent Borchers presented this information to you a couple of months ago, but to refresh your memory, next year the class of 2027 will be taking U.S. History 1 rather than what used to be World Civilizations and then World History. That history course will begin with early America and go through 1877. Sophomore year, students will take U.S. History 2, which will go from 1877 to present day, and also include an AP U.S. History option for sophomores. That change is happening because the 8th grade history course used to be American history and has already evolved. And so now we have to evolve with it and really make sure that we're in compliance with state laws and state frameworks that really emphasize that students should leave a Massachusetts high school with 2 years of robust American history experience. In addition to that shift, which will take students into modern world history with a modern world history advanced placement option, this year we also introduced a semester civic action and public speaking course into our program of studies. There's another state law that says that every student should have the opportunity to have a robust civic engagement opportunity at the high school level. And so we created this course as a pilot this year and also incorporated some of the curriculum from a previous course we used to use as a graduation requirement, once named Oral English and later rebranded as Public Speaking. And that course was created, I would say, like 30 years ago, and in its time was really innovative. And since the creation of that course, what has happened is that Massachusetts has caught up and further innovated in terms of how we think about teaching students speaking and listening skills. And there's an increased emphasis on making sure that the things students are speaking about and having discourse about are tied to like real things, like period equity, that are personalized and really matter to students. And while the pilot this year has been successful, there were some limitations to implementing it because it was interdisciplinary and created a lot of inflexibility in our schedule build. It was almost impossible to pull off this year, and we think with reductions it will be very challenging. We also believe that we are able to get at those public speaking competencies as integrated parts of our English curriculum and shift the course from the English department to the social studies department so that the course is more focused on civic action and engagement. And keeping that course in the social studies department will help to restore some of the flexibility that we lose elsewhere in the budget with reductions. And from that course, students will then move to either a semester, several semester social studies offerings or full year electives offerings. And we know that by the time the class of 2027 arrives at the 12th grade, we're going to need to overhaul those electives offerings. And we still believe that we'll be able to do that even in the face of these reductions.
Great. Any questions for Amy?
Any questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, so those are the reductions at the high school. There's one reduction at the middle school. It's a 0.4 FTE cut to middle school music. As I said, it changes what is now like a co-taught model where there are 2 teachers in the room for middle school chorus, which is a large class, and they are middle school age kids, right? So this does not result in a reduction in course offerings, though, or change the class size. We didn't make any reductions in core academics at the middle school. That would increase class sizes at the middle school, and it would also really disrupt the team structure, which is a really important part of the middle school's model. So we didn't want to do that. The elementary level, as I mentioned, we're looking at restructuring the intervention model. And so that is accomplished by reducing 2.8 elementary literacy specialists and 2.5 elementary math specialists. It's a net savings there because, as I mentioned, in restructuring it, we would hire additional support personnel. So the net savings is about $266,000. And I'm going to have Allison talk a little bit about the model in a second, but I just want to talk about the second bullet here. So this reduction doesn't impact elementary class sizes. And I want to make sure I'm clear about that. So when we look at our projections for next year, all of our elementary class sizes are currently projected to be within or below the school committee's class size guidelines. However, when we looked at different options, we realized that any further reduction to elementary gen ed teachers would have created class sections, some class sections that were above the guidelines. And we've sort of looked at that phenomenon before, right? We have relatively small schools where we have 2 or 3 sections typically. And so, you know, the only opportunities, if you will, to further reduce would be places where we have, say, 46 students at a grade, and we're currently budgeting to have 3 sections, right? So it'd be 15, 15, and 16. If you reduced 1 section, you would have 23 and 23, right? Or there's, I think at Deerfield, the 5th grade, next year, it's 2 sections at 14 and 13, very small. But if we reduced, we would have 1 section of 27 for 5th grade, right? So those numbers are not great numbers. And we have this guiding principle, particularly right now, we're hearing a lot from teachers about the needs that they're seeing in classrooms of keeping the elementary class size small. So, you know, to state the obvious, none of these reductions are optimal. Clearly, I did not propose them in January, right? But we had to make some, you know, some difficult choices because we have like many things that we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to ask Allison to talk a little bit about what the model is.
Sure. And I realize there's irony since I think I was here a couple years ago advocating to increase these positions. So it's hard to be back in this role under these circumstances. And I think what we were trying to think about is how do we restructure and kind of hold on to the core of the model, which has been highly successful at the elementary level. So currently we have a half-time coordinator for math and a half-time coordinator for literacy. We have 6.5 FTE for math and 6.8 FTE for literacy. That extra 0.3, there's a history to that, but it's not worth going into right here. And essentially those positions are spread out so that the larger schools have a little more staffing in the larger school, and there's a 1.0 at the smaller schools in the district. So, you know, Hanlon, Deerfield, and Hamlet and Deerfield have 1.0 and 1.5 at Martha Jones, Sheehan, and Downey. Okay. In addition, there are about 4.2 literacy paraprofessionals. I'd say the division of labor really is, you know, coordinator's role is to oversee the programming, think about professional development, think about kind of what's coming up in the universe of literacy and math, make sure the team is operating as a team, helping in terms of district rollout of professional development, things like that. The literacy specialists and the math specialists actually have an interesting 2-part role. So they have a role of sort of building teacher capacity and supporting teachers in consult and coaching work, so pushing into classrooms so that they can work with groups, but also kind of being at data meetings, helping to sort of plan and co-plan with teachers and figure out, you know, if I've got students in my class who are struggling, what do I do about that? Okay. The second part of the role is more direct intervention with students, and that's really about, you know, pulling a student or small group out of class or pushing into a class to work with the students. Okay. So the shift in model kind of has 3 parts to it. It reduces the literacy specialist staffing to 1 person per school in each content area post-consolidation. So there'd be 1 literacy and math specialist at Deerfield Hamlin, which I realize is not 1 school at the start of the year, so we'll talk about that in a second. At Downey, at Sheehan, and at Martha Jones. It would increase the coordinator's role to 1.0, so a full-time coordinator, and it would increase paraprofessional staffing to 4.0 paras kind of dedicated for math and 8.0 paras dedicated for literacy. And I'll explain the difference between the 2 areas as well. So the reason for the increase in the coordinator's role is really thinking about utilizing more paraprofessionals to do more of the direct intervention work and requiring the coordinator to sort of travel around, oversee, plan, and support that intervention work, do training with paraprofessional staff. So we really need somebody to sort of track and monitor everything across the district. Right now, it would be hard for those folks to do that work because they split their time between being a specialist and working directly with students and being a coordinator. The specialists would really be more in that consult, coaching, and data work with in kind of conjunction with the principals, CST teams, helping teachers think a little bit about what to do strategically to support students. Of course, they continue to work with students, especially in cases where we have students with the kind of complicated, or presenting in complicated ways. You know, I never want to kind of trade off highly qualified staff for folks who we don't even know who they are yet, because we have to go find them and hire them and train them. But it is a way to kind of hold on to the core of what we do and do so well, and still actualize a net savings and hopefully not lose something important to the district. So, yeah, that's what
And the
it is.
net of this, there will actually be more staff.
It will be, yeah,
in
more
the
bodies
school.
in the building,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and Allison mentioned something very important that I neglected to put on the slide, right? So there's actually an increase of 0.5 for the literacy coordinator and increase of 0.5 for the math coordinator. Okay, yes, questions, sorry.
Sorry. I'm just wondering, with the decrease in the highly qualified, phenomenal staff, is there a chance that we're going to see an increase in students needing the support of student services where we know that we're already in a challenging situation? My understanding of some of these specialists is they kind of maybe bridge the gap or get people where they need to be.
Indeed, I think that's a concern. You know, when I talked about the differential between the math and literacy sort of para team, I think kind of the hyper investment in literacy para would be really designed to have enough staffing to kind of get to a lot of students. It is gonna, you know, it feels risky a little bit, but I think, you know, having the bodies in the building to sit next to kids and do the work, I'm hopeful that that's helpful, and especially given the kind of early literacy initiative coming out of the state and the need to really shore up early literacy. Sometimes what students need is somebody to sit with them, or somebody to sit with them and their buddy and do the work. So, yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a crystal ball. We're gonna do everything we can to make it work as best we can. We have great people. I'm glad to be able to hold on to some of them.
I know one of the concerns with the budget was that we've had to hire contractors because we weren't able to identify enough folks. Is there a possibility, though, that, I mean, we're needing to hire more paras, right? So is there a possibility that if we cannot find those folks, that then we will have to resort to the contract model again? Okay.
No, I don't know that that would be the model for this, but
Okay.
I'm nodding because we've thought about this issue, and like our literacy paras are, as an average, are paid a little bit more than the IAs, but more importantly, like, we've considered whether we may need to actually be a little bit proactive and think about what's the appropriate rate as we post the position. So we'll have to monitor that, but we know that we'll have to be, you know, we'll have to do a lot of work, right, to recruit.
Yeah, I think we've been very fortunate in that, you know, in this community, and given the reputation of the teams of specialists here, we tend to attract people who are interested in kind of learning, you know, often overqualified folks who are certified in their own right, kind of want to do the work here and then go on and get specialist jobs somewhere else. So it's been good luck so far, and I hope it keeps rolling as best it can.
Thanks.
So.
Go ahead.
And we'll sort of keep monitoring clearly.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And just another question kind of about how the process will work. So my understanding is that, you know, each student, the literacy or the math specialist kind of comes up with a plan, almost like a personalized plan for each student, and works through it with them. So will a highly qualified specialist still come up with a plan, and then the paraprofessional will implement it? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, that's more the idea, that the sort of specialists would be more in the, working with the adults to sort of do the planning part, and
Okay,
more of
for
the
each
boots on the
student.
ground work with students would fall to the parents.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not an uncommon model in bigger sort of districts with Title I funding and things like that. This is often how it's utilized. You know, in my heart of hearts, you know, it'd be great to hold on to what we've got, but we've tried to hold on to a little corner.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So that's it. So the next steps Obviously, we're happy to entertain other questions. As I said, we're scheduled to present to the FinCom on Tuesday. So we will do that. And we are going to continue to communicate with the Budget Steering Committee. So we're still waiting for some information. Health insurance costs, that's still not finalized. Chapter 70, state aid. You know, the municipal budget is projecting a pretty significant increase in Chapter 70. And so fingers crossed, because that would be a curveball.
When do we hear that?
Well, it comes out basically when the governor's proposed budget
right.
comes out, but because it's a new
Right.
governor, the new governor gets an extension. Yeah. And then we have the school committee budget hearing and vote in March. So there you have it.
But this, what you proposed hasn't been, I mean, we obviously haven't voted on this. We haven't, okay,
No,
okay.
you haven't.
Not this budget, but I mean this contract, so, okay.
The contract? Yeah, no, that's still in progress.
Wait. Yeah, okay.
So we will vote in March on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also just like, I've had the chance to be there listening to Lumma and Emily explain to the members of the select board, the FinCom, and the town manager this whole process, and it's been a wonderful process to see how much, you know, we've done a 3.5% budget increase for 6 years, and they suddenly realized what happened this year. You know, so many things out of our control. And if we just wanted to have a flat budget, it'd be 5.8%. So the town has given up some of their raises for us. So that was an important thing, that they really reached out to try to come up and find ways of allowing us to have 4.5%. So I really want to acknowledge a lot of work was made on their parts to accommodate us, feeling our budget's so important, and how hard we tried over at least 6 years to keep it at 3.5. But I think that they went out of their way to try to accommodate us, giving us something to even afford 4.5%. Well, we'll have our vote on the budget, and thank you for all the questions, good questions, and thank you for all the time you spent
Crunching numbers.
It's unbelievable how much the changes you've made and the way you're able to respond to every question that the FinCom had and the select board. So anyway, thank you.
And just so it's clear, if the only way to kind of avoid all of this, or not all of this, but avoid some of these cuts that everybody is trying to avoid, would be to increase taxes, right? I mean,
Well, yes, but I just want to like clarify that, like, there's no mechanism for increasing taxes
Exactly.
beyond
We
2.5.
can't just decide
No,
that.
we
Right,
can't do that.
right.
And
The town
so,
will vote,
and
but no
so
vote, yeah.
the budget that's being presented by the municipal side and the school department accounts for the tax revenue that's going to come in under 2.5.
Right.
Right, so like that money is earmarked within this proposed budget. And so, yeah, to get more in tax revenue would require an operational override. And as you know, that is a very big deal and not something that typically you can get through in a couple of months. And, you know, as you know, the residents of Westwood supported the school department last fall with the largest debt exclusion override that the community's ever had. And so, you know, the tax impact of that vote is going to be felt now going into next year, right? So it's not a great climate, I guess I would say, to be looking for an operational override.
There is a second way, though, just to be clear.
Mm.
We did make to the WTA a proposal, what we assumed in January, and if they had agreed to that agreement and ratified it, we would, is that fair to say? When we had different assumptions in January, that's what we did. Is that fair?
That's fair to say. So
Okay.
the proposed budget in January was based on that assumption of what we were offering at the time. And there is now an increased offer, and yeah,
Right.
So
this
is
is how we would pay for it.
Is that our fourth offer or our third?
Well, it's not a tentative agreement. We're just saying in the back and forth
Right, right, right.
counters.
So we had two tentative agreements.
These,
that were
this,
voted
this,
down.
this is just an offer sort of back and forth, and I
Okay.
think we've had
Yeah.
multiple of those.
Okay.
Yes, we're just in a process
Okay.
at this point.
But kind of circling back to my previous question, so March 28th is when the FinCom vote happens,
Yes.
right? So if this contract situation isn't resolved by then and the numbers continue to change after they've taken their vote, that could continue to create more impact. Is that safe to assume?
I mean, that's a correct statement. So
Okay.
once you vote your budget, you'll vote the bottom line. Let's assume for a second that it's going to be this bottom line, 54.1. And the FinCom will do its vote, and that will be on its way to town meeting. And then if residents approve that number, that's the number.
Yep.
And so, yes, so if the assumptions that we have built into this revised budget, if they were to turn out to be too low, yeah, it's the same process, right? To go back and say, like, okay, in order to increase your offer, you have to be able to afford it. And so we'd have to figure out how to do that. And I know, I want to acknowledge, I know that the school committee really didn't want to make cuts to staff. None of us do, right? We have wonderful teachers here, and we don't want to lose highly skilled people. And at the same time, we also do want to compensate our teachers, right? So it's like the both and we're trying to thread that needle at this point.
Any further discussion before we move on? Okay,
So,
Ellie?
I'm sorry. So, what you proposed tonight isn't necessarily in line with what WTA has requested. So it's not like, it hasn't been agreed upon. So there's still a chance, I guess this is Dory's point, there's still a chance that we could be here next month and there's still a large delta and we're looking at additional.
So we have not settled the contract, right? So there is no agreement.
Right.
And even if there is an agreement with the bargaining teams, then the membership has to vote, right? So we're steps away from that. What this proposed budget does is it ensures that the school committee would have the money to honor its most recent offer. That's
So
what
if
it
we
does.
had to go back and give another offer that's higher, we would then have to find additional ways to pay for it.
Yes.
Okay, so last month when you were saying there's like 3 scenarios you had planned for. and
Tier
you were-
one,
Something like tier, yeah, the
Yes,
different tiers,
so,
and then you got
yes.
to a point where you're like, I can't even think about the third one.
We're there.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yes, so in the proposed budget in January, we talked in December, we said there were sort of 3 possible tiers of reductions. The proposed budget in January, in order to get to a balanced number that we could afford,
Yeah.
it took the tier 1 reductions. This takes tier 2 and 3, with the exception of one position that we still have in the district-wide testing psychologist, which we think is really important right now. We did not take that. But yes, we took all the other reductions.
So it's fair to say what we've talked about tonight is consistent with our offer,
Yes.
okay? And if it's not accepted, just
Right.
not within this
Yep.
budget. But what's in this, but what was discussed tonight is within the offer that has been put on the table.
And I think what's important to say, and you said this, but I want to iterate it, that everything we heard in public participation, we wholeheartedly agree, right?
Yes.
There is no doubt that, I think the 5 of us as parents alone probably know more than anyone what these teachers have done, particularly through COVID. And and we want to honor that and we want to pay that. And at the same time, we have a number. And we have to make both of those things true at the same time.
Yes.
And I think that's an important point because that is why we're feeling so much pain, right? We know how much these teachers are worth, and in a real world, right, in like a world that we all want to live in, we would be able to give them as much as we can. But we also have this bucket of money, and we need to make both things true. And this is the only way we can do that. And none of us are happy sitting up here, but they're both true at the same time.
We've also been advised that the chances of an override with all the town did for us with the building.
It's not gonna happen.
These are just people trying to be honest with us that don't plan on it. It's not gonna happen right now. So we're living within some constraints. And I think we've heard occasionally from people saying the teachers feel like they're not respected. I don't know anybody that respects them more than us, and we regularly say it. I think what Allison pointed out to us not too long ago, that as they've tried to study towns that recovered from the pandemic, and Massachusetts showed the greatest recovery of any state in the country with math tests. And Westwood's in there like 2 or 3 of the 350 towns that showed the best recovery. And when asked what happened, it's our teachers. So there's nothing but great respect for what our teachers represent and to keep them here and to recruit them here. So I don't think there's anything that is shown any lack of respect. I think we have fantastic respect, and we know the backbone of our system, besides good administration, is our teachers.
Yeah.
Are we ready to move on to the next item?
Yep.
I just want to thank Tony and Maya for being
Yeah, thank you.
part
Thank
of
you.
Thank
those
you also for
discussions.
the superintendent search also. You're doing so much for the work here. Thank you.
Tony's
The
sick
next
of me.
item is the equity audit recommendations.
Great. All right, thank you. So, we're going to be taking sort of a team approach here to talking about the equity audit findings overview. Oh, there we go, we're switching seats. Yes, and I was supposed to introduce it. Now I'm trying to remember what my job was in terms of introducing the presentation. Oh, I remember, I remember. So we were happy to share with the community tonight an overview of the findings of the equity audit. We've been engaged in this process since last spring. And so Latifa and Allison and I have had an opportunity to review our consultant's draft report, but they haven't finished the final report. So our presentation tonight is based on that draft review. When the final report comes out, which we expect in probably 2 weeks, we will be posting the entire report on the website so that anyone who's interested in reading the full report is encouraged to do so. And what we thought we would do, in addition to kind of talking here tonight, is that once that report is available, we will at the same time publish a couple of dates. And if members of the community are interested in just coming in and talking to the 3 of us about the report, then we would welcome those conversations. So that's sort of the plan from here. Okay, so we all have to remember which slides we're in charge of. All right, we're starting with Latifa.
So we've kind of chunked this report tonight into 4 sections to go over and give kind of a overarching update on where we are in the process and what PCG has found. And so we're going to look at and talk about the purpose. We're going to talk about the process that we went through, the big ideas that we have found out so far, and then start to think about and talk about the ways that we want to follow up and move forward. And so why did Westwood complete an equity audit? And so it was a really interesting process for Allison, Emily, and I as we embarked upon the equity audit, and I would say from the beginning, and Allison's going to talk about the process, but when we were writing the RFP, really thinking about what we wanted to get out of the process and the end product of the equity audit. And one of the things was really thinking about defining educational equity for Westwood Public Schools. And, we spent many, many hours, days, weeks, and months talking about, this definition. And, what it really boiled down to for us is thinking about educational equity as fairness or giving every student what they need. And the equity audit is about finding out where our strengths lie and where our weaknesses lie as well. And we want to ensure that we are being really thoughtful and intentional about providing supports and opportunities and resources for all of our students. And so, as we as we started to, write the RFP and really think about why having an equity audit is the right thing for us. And we can move on to the next slide. The audit, it gives us, the answer to the question of, not whether, we're a good district, because we know we are, right? We do what's best for students, but it gives us an opportunity to look at, where we may be falling short and where we're doing a really good job in seeking and providing equity for our students. It's also an opportunity to gain an outside perspective of what we're doing. A lot of times, we are the ones that are doing the work. We're supporting our students, we're supporting our educators, and so because we're deeply in the weeds of it, it's hard to take an overarching viewpoint. And so having an outside agency come in and objectively look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the impact that it is, the actual impact that it's having on our students and on the culture of our school system is one of the benefits of having the equity audit. And, it's the idea of, with social studies or the math audit, like where we are looking at the breadth and scope of the work that we're doing, the equity audit is similar in that realm. And so really studying our effectiveness and the effectiveness of the impact that what we say we're doing, we are really doing. And in doing this examination, we have to collect data and analyze the data to assess the degree in which we are achieving equitable outcomes for our students. And so going into this, our goal, we really took a strategic stance and wanted to focus on high priority goals and actions. And what we meant by that was we wanted to figure out where were the best places to pull the levers that will really drive our district and the work that we're doing within our district forward and propel us into the next steps. And then also to build capacity to serve more students and more families in a better way over time.
I got the kind of boring part. I'm going to talk about process. I'm going to do super fast. I think I stepped out to grab dinner and I got assigned this. So on the RFP, I did want to note, when we developed the RFP, there was a kind of boilerplate version of this flying around a lot of similar districts, and we took it and we really did customize it for Westwood in two very specific ways. First of all, we asked about strategic prioritization. We know there's work to be done. We know there's a lot of work to be done, and instead of getting a report that told us like everything we needed to do all the time, we needed something that was going to sort of channel our energy so we could really focus, because we didn't want it to be one of these kind of whack-a-mole situations. And then the second piece is we really indicated an openness to working with a consultant or organization that had worked outside the K-12 public sector. And we did that just kind of interested in what somebody in that realm might bring to the table for us. Okay. So we embarked on this vendor review process. Amanda was part of the team and included district administrators, some educators, Michelle Miller from Town Hall, who helped with procurement, kind of steered us a little bit through the process. And we met virtually with the different consultants who had provided proposals. We rated those proposals, so we had kind of a rank ordering in mind. And then we opened up the envelopes with the price tag, and we had to do a selection process. And in that selection process, we had to balance out both the ratings and what we thought of the proposals, affordability, and timeline constraints. I just want to remind people this is being paid for out of grant funding, so we really had to look to an organization that was going to help us get started and pay for this in a timely way. Additionally, there's a sense of urgency, I think, coming from the community at large about getting started, so we wanted to do that. Finally, we kind of formed our own small steering committee to be the interface point with PCG, and we met with them weekly for a while there, and every other week, I think, toward the end. But initially to propose, to kind of go through the timeline and plan. I'm going to walk through the timeline. This is kind of what it looked like. The summer was really about some pre-planning and gathering quantitative data and qualitative data that was sort of floating around in the district in some format. So descriptions of our professional development courses, data that was publicly available through the state, data that was available through us. So all that stuff we sort of put in folders and gave to the consultants. And did a little bit of explaining so that they had some context for it. In August, they really launched the sort of outreach to the community to involve other people in the process. So they conducted a series of stakeholder interviews of people both inside and outside the school department in August. They completed surveys of staff, students, and families in September. They conducted a small series of focus groups in October, kind of with the thinking that, you know, you get survey data and then kind of you can dive a little deeper into the explanation of what people are thinking about and indicating on the survey with focus groups. And then they went off in their corner and churned through all that and brought us back some stuff in late December, and we started meeting in January to kind of look at their analysis and initial draft report. They had questions about some of the things they noticed, and they've just given us an executive summary, and we expect a final report in just a couple weeks. So that's it.
All right, I got the exciting part. So, what did we learn from the audit? So, first, they identified some strengths to build on, and so it was nice to see some of those themes coming through from different constituents in the process. And so first and foremost, they noted that students in the Westwood Public Schools generally feel supported academically and that they have go-to staff that they can go to. And this was really, it was a notable finding in that it was, a very large percentage of students who feel this way, and that there was not a difference between different groups of students, right? So across all of our students, our BIPOC students, our students from historically marginalized groups, this was a finding across those groups. They noted the number of programs and groups that the district has that are geared towards promoting students' sense of belonging. And I really want to commend all the people. There's so many people in the district who are doing that work, right? From building to building, administrators, teachers. I can see it happening, and so it was really nice to see that coming back at us through this process. It was reported that families generally feel welcome, and also that a theme coming from families in the survey and also in the focus groups and interviews is that people are noticing the district's recent efforts related to diversity, equity, integration, and belonging. They noted that there is a commitment in the district to pursuing equity, and they pointed to some specific concrete things that have happened recently. For instance, creating the Director of Equity, Integration, and Community Partnerships, undertaking the equity audit in and of itself. They noted noted our efforts in human resources practices. That's something that we've really been working on, that we've been talking a lot about here. So changes in our practices around recruiting and hiring, training that we've provided for hiring heads, participation in broader initiatives, so things like MPDE, and also some of the things that we're doing to support the staff that are here, so staff affinity groups. They noted some strengths in professional development, and that's professional development for leaders, for teachers, and for all kinds of staff. And so that felt good because we feel like there has been a lot of work happening. As Latifah and maybe Allison have noted, though, what we are really interested in is saying, okay, we've been doing a lot of this work, but how do we make it more strategic and focused and cohesive? And could we get a sense of what are the highest leverage things that we should be doing next to drive that work? So, continued findings. Some opportunities to improve, which we knew. There's a lot of work to be done. One of the findings that they had is that students and staff do notice and experience instances of bias as well as racism, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination at school. And that's a hard finding to read, and clearly not what we want in the Westwood Public Schools. That's not our vision. but really important for us to be hearing from folks, hear what people in focus groups said, to be able to read those open response questions, and that's a really important thing for us to pay attention to and figure out how to work on that. Something that really came through is that the vision for equity work in the WPS isn't widely understood, and so we felt that coming from the community and from families and from staff. And so that's important for us to hear. And that's something that we have already really been talking a lot about this fall. And at last month's school committee meeting, we showed you that we had launched an area on our webpage where we're really trying to be clear about what the vision for equity work is, what we mean by educational equity, the why behind it, what the work looks like in practice. And I think what we're realizing is that we need to do a better job communicating with people about those things. And we're really thinking about, using some of the work that we did creating the webpage, how we make sure that we're sort of beating that drum everywhere and bringing people into understanding the work and the why behind it. They found that, educator skills and confidence for engaging in equity work vary widely. And I think that that's something that I don't think that was a surprise to find that. That certainly came through. And I think that that's, related to some thoughts that we have about professional development. A strength that they noted was professional development here. And then the next thing to sort of think about on that front is that we know that there is work to be done in terms of educators' skill, where we have to develop some things in common, that all staff have certain competencies and skills. That's really important. And at the same time, we have people who are at a different place in their skill level and sort of farther along in that work. And we also want to make sure that we continue to support those people in their growth. And so how do we, make things that are perhaps like required for everyone, and then also continue to create opportunities for people who want to engage in other work? And how do we differentiate our professional development for adults just like we do for students, right? So that's really important. They noted that staff diversity is not reflective of student diversity. I think that was, not a giant aha for us. We did know that was the case, and that's something, as we are focused on. And this is related, though, to the next finding, that they really shined a light on the fact that we currently don't have a department or a dedicated leadership position to support HR work. And there is a sense that there are these initiatives that we have going, good work that's happening, and yet we don't sort of have the capacity to do what needs to be done to really move them forward effectively and with sustained momentum. And I know in the budget process, this year obviously we just couldn't do it, couldn't get the HR director in, but I say this as my gift to the people who be here. You really need an HR director. That would be super important and a goal, I think, going forward. And then finally, they noted that equity considerations aren't included consistently as a factor in policy and day-to-day decisions. And so I would sort of further say, they had a really helpful suggestion here in that, we always talk about the fact that we want to apply an equity lens to every decision we're making. So that's something we talk about, right? It's in the discourse. But they have some suggestions about identifying and adopting a specific framework that we use to be making those decisions. They reviewed the school committee policy manual. They looked at a lot of those policies, and they did acknowledge, because we told them, that the school committee policy work is in progress. And so I do want to, acknowledge that the school committee is in the process of doing exactly what they think the school committee needs to do.
And the language of the policies, I don't want to minimize it, but what's an example of substance of a policy? that we're
Yeah,
off on?
I mean, I think, well,
I mean, there's language we should fix if there's language stuff for sure, but I mean substance. Was there substance?
We're
example?
getting to the I section next. so
Right.
it-
Okay.
you'll see it there.
Okay.
You'll definitely see it
I mean,
there. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the instruction section. And I
Right.
think things start to get kind of interesting. So,
Right.
yeah.
But even, it gets really interesting there. I mean, certainly policies around hiring, right? I mean, the policies, they just don't sort of explicitly like make,
Okay. Okay.
you know, diversification of talent
okay.
a priority, or they don't, you know, call out equity. So, but I think we're talking about that in the policy
Okay,
review,
okay.
so you're gonna see it. Okay. So, you know, lots of work to be done here. And as Allison said, we really said in order for this to be useful, like what is the purpose of this process, we needed it to provide us with like focus and say, here are like the 5 things that we think you need to really focus on next to drive the work. So here they are.
Yes,
team's gonna talk
our
about them.
priority recommendations. And so over the course of the months, the conversation with PCG for us was really having them hone in on the, the top priorities that we should be looking at first in order to, as I said earlier, move us forward. And we understand that, equity work and to do anything really well is going to take time, but we wanted to really seek their advice and get their recommendations of where should we put our efforts in right now. And so they left us with 5 priority recommendations. And so the first one is around communication. And so Emily talked about that earlier when she was sharing some of the findings. And so they're telling us that we need to create an equity communication plan. And, something to note in this, the first priority is that it's not an equity plan, right? Because we do strongly believe that equity is embedded and needs to be embedded in everything that we do. And I'll talk about that in the later on in the other priorities, but that, it's about us talking about what we're doing and how we're doing, bringing it up in conversations, communicating it to the community, having our teachers know exactly what efforts are in place to support equity, having the principals know and talk about it as well. And so it's really being very clear with our words and how we're saying and talking about what we're doing, because we are doing some things, and so now we need to make sure that it's in a concrete and concerted, very intentional way of communicating it. And one of the steps is our equity webpage, and there are also some other things that we're thinking about right now. The second one is around the equity decision-making tool. And so what they're saying is they're asking us to select and then implement district-wide an equity decision-making framework. And so what that is really thinking about, we call them sometimes equity pauses, or, having a series of questions that, in school committee, in our, academic leadership teams, in our administrative leadership teams, in IEP meetings, just all across the district, that everyone knows and understands that we have adopted and we use a framework in order to make sure that we are bringing to the forefront, anytime we're making a decision about, a student, about a new policy, about, how we're looking at data, all of those things, so that we're clear on what it is that, we have to have training behind it so that people understand the purpose of it, and it's not just something that, teachers get in a habit of doing, or, principals get in a habit of asking those questions, and we're really not thinking about it. So it's really about the thought process behind everything that we're doing. And then the third one, develop an equity data collection, tracking, and reporting plan. And so, and Allison's gonna give us an example later on, but it's really thinking about, how do we use the data that we have? How do we collect it? And then how do we analyze it? And then what do we do with it? And then going back to the communication plan, how do we then communicate to the community and all of our constituents and stakeholders that, we are cognizant of, a piece of data and we have a plan to address it. The fourth is hire a director of human resources. And so, in the executive summary, they talk about, the concerted effort that we have been taking over the past couple years of, trying to diversify our workforce and looking at retention, recruitment efforts, the trainings that we've done, and the consistency isn't there. And so, as they talked to us and collected information from us and looked at, all of the data that was submitted, and as they had conversations with our faculty and staff, they realized that, that consistency piece is key. And so having a leadership position that's solely dedicated to helping us, create some, some policies and practices around hiring and retaining our staff is really, really important. And then the fifth one is to create an equity-aligned professional learning plan. And so, in the executive summary and throughout our conversations, we were able to articulate all of the wonderful professional development opportunities that we're able to offer to our educators. As Emily said, from leadership, we are participating in specific equity professional development ourselves. Our academic council team is doing a book study right now specific to looking at anti-racist practices. Our teachers, they have a variety of different PD focused on equity, that where we bring outside people in, but that they're creating themselves as teachers and providing this professional development to their colleagues. And so we have a variety of things that we're doing, and it's not clear how those pieces are aligned, how they're connected. There's the differentiation. Emily talked about, are there, specific things that we say as a district, Westwood Public School educators will all have X and Y skills. And then from there, we'll begin to differentiate, because we know that some teachers are further along, on the journey than others. They have, a set of skills already, and are we extending those skills? And then are we also providing teachers that are not further along, the basic skills and the beginning skills? And so really thinking about, how we lay out that plan and how we keep track of teacher learning and hold teachers and ourselves accountable to, actually, doing what we say we want to do and what's best for children.
Oops, sorry, I didn't see the question.
It's fine. I got this part since I had the process part, which was boring. So, we wanted to break this down to sort of immediate, sort of short-term steps, things that we're looking at for next year, and then things kind of that I think are going to be in that 3 to 5 year strategic band. First thing we already did, which is great, which is publishing the website. We talked a little bit about that as a piece of the communication tool in general. We've already gotten some feedback about that. We're going to kind of continue to refine that as a tool. We need to get the audit information out. Once we have it in hand, we're going to get copies of it out sort of on the website, the full report, as well as the executive summary. And then, as we said, those findings are going to be shared in a variety of ways, both internally and externally. We'd like to have some community coffees for people to come and say, well, I noticed this thing, or I have a question, or this freaks me out, or whatever they need to say, and we can talk about it. And then additionally, the audit findings really need to be shared comprehensively within the district. So school and district leadership, we have a team that has just formed of equity leaders who are going to help with kind of actualizing some of this work and steering the ship, and then faculty and staff throughout the schools. We also need to sort of identify within that broad framework, those 5 big strategic goals, what are focus areas And how do we plan a detailed timeline for implementation given this next kind of couple years? And that, I'm thinking about this very similarly to a curriculum review. When we complete a curriculum review, then it sort of falls to that department and that leadership team to sort of steer the ship around how do we implement these recommendations. So it's really going to be kind of Latifa and the equity team will start to sort of flesh out, here are the steps, and then it's going to involve the whole community in terms of who does what. Things that interface with curriculum, and for now, human resources will fall kind of in the assistant superintendent's office. Other things are going to fall other places. Some things around data, we may be looking to Steve to help us build out better tools for being able to monitor what we're doing. And this is kind of saying, hello. Kind of to sort of further the point, this work is really everybody's work. I want to emphasize that. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. We hear too often a story of districts that hire a director of equity or diversity and then sort of abandon that person and say, okay, go fix everything. And that is absolutely not the approach we're going to take here. We understand that Latifa's role is critical and really important in terms of providing leadership, but district and school leaders are going to need to kind of help develop some of those changes that take place, boots on the ground in the schools. And also to start to think about how to communicate better about what we're doing. The school committee, I'm going to kind of cycle around to this. Thinking about that tool that we're going to try to adopt, I do think we're going to need to do kind of a drive-by kind of look through again as before, I know you've reviewed the policy before it's sort of formally adopted as an entire set of policy manual. I think it makes sense to take a moment to do a check, make sure that we are being really explicit about are there opportunities that we missed first pass. Okay. PTO leaders, we've got some great leadership emerging out of the different PTOs of people specifically interested in working on this as an issue. And they've started to kind of meet together and are kind of interfacing with the school department, which is great. And student leaders. We have a lot of interest and support from students who want to see things work better for everybody at the school. So I want to give an example of how this is going to kind of look in real time. A detailed focus area that popped up in the data that came out has to do with something called disproportionality, and it came out in student discipline. Okay, you've heard us talk a little bit about disproportionality before because the state assesses us and sort of gives us feedback about whether we're hitting disproportionality in terms of some academic indicators, including things like the referral or IEP rates for different demographic groups. That's one bucket. There are others. Abby's
Restrictiveness of placement?
Yes. A lot of it sort of intersects with special education. So we get that report, and in those areas, so far we're doing, we're kind of keeping it together. This is one where we have work to do. And what you'll see is that PCG has an analysis using a risk ratio, and they looked at student discipline referral risk by race, 2021-22 school year. So just a snapshot, okay? And it's one example of something we need to look at more closely. So how are we gonna do it, and how does it work with those 5 buckets? I'll kind of talk through 4 of the 5 are really important for this, right? Thinking about data collection, we'll look at the audit data that we got as a starting point, but we'll need to continually track the discipline data throughout the year, analyze the review, and review the impact of any process and policy changes that we make to see what do we do to sort of move the dial. Professional development, professional learning is going to be a huge part of this. We need more universal, high-quality PD in terms of practices around promoting positive student behavior and then responding effectively to unexpected behavior. So how do we do that in a way that works for all kids? Decision-making and thinking about that tool, that how do you use a lens? We need to make sure that the things that we've got in our handbooks, our policies and practices around student discipline are really designed to promote equitable outcomes. And then communication's really important, this one. Whenever you talk about student behavior and discipline, it's a topic that people have lots of feelings and thoughts about, often based on their own kind of experiences and upbringing and behavior. So it's important that we're really engaging with caregivers and families and other community members about any changes in policy and practice and how it aligns to our vision overall. I think when you talk about starting to look at this, people worry that, you know, you're going to somehow let all sorts of bad behavior happen and let everybody off the hook. And really good looking at student behavior and changing practice around that isn't about reduced accountability. It's actually about increased accountability to one another and to the entire community. So. And then kind of looking, so that's a sort of snapshot of the sort of thing we're going to be digging into next year. Okay. And that one in particular, I'm just forecasting for you, we're going to be digging into next year. Get ready. Thinking about the longer range 3 to 5 year commitment, these are all, we think this is a 3 to 5 year timeline to really establish meaningful change in all of these areas. And what that means really for us is there's going to be a lot of other sort of smaller scale recommendations in this report that we may need to sort of back burner as we work on this, because what we asked for from the consultant was give us those things that are going to sort of raise our floor so that we can kind of continue to build and not sort of feel like we're constantly sort of shifting around and putting out kind of one crisis or another all over the place. So I just wanted to frame that that's the timeline for all of this work, and you'll hear more about the details as we go.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
Any questions? Thank you very much for the work you've done.
Thanks.
Well,
Can I ask one question? I'm sorry.
Please.
Oh, please.
So, I'm sorry. So the, obviously the fact that students experience bias and racism and homophobia is not acceptable. And I just want to gain an understanding of like how the district responds to those occurrences and if, you know, without having to work within the confines of this long-range commitment, like are there any triggers that can be pulled quickly to try to decrease the occurrence of those instances?
Okay. I would say there's sort of, well, I think we all probably
We
chime
all
in
have
different,
things,
different,
yeah.
all have
Yeah.
things to say here. I mean, I think what we do consistently, and I think you've seen evidence of that in terms of communicating out to families, is try and respond. I think what we are hoping to do is to do things more proactively so that we're not responding,
So it's
if
not-
that makes
right,
sense.
right. That's the whole idea.
So I know some student programming, particularly at the high school level, I think we'd like to see more at other levels. I know principals have been engaged in this, but you know, we're currently in the process of developing that kind of redeveloping grade 5 to 6 programming as well. You know, how do we get kids comfortable talking about issues around race and difference in ways where they can do it and just be nice, you know, and understand what the norms are. I think that's the learning part.
Yeah, and you know, I would add to that, you know, of course, seeing that finding in writing and you know, the evidence that they provided, you know, is hard to read and see, and also knowing and, you know, having students share personally things that have happened and occurred to them is really hard to hear. You know, and I think that when you know, so we don't need an equity audit to tell us that these things are happening and to do, you know, to start to do things, you know, about it. And so, you know, right now we're planning for 5th, 6th grade, you know, PD with teachers, with the students, as well as with parents to talk about, you know, how do you know, just talk about some of these things in a way that is, you know, non-threatening and, you know, and doesn't feel so hard, so that when things come up, students feel comfortable sharing, whether it's with their parents or with someone at school, so that we can address it and remind students or parents or teachers, you know, what our core values are. Also giving teachers some language and some tools in order to address things and talk about things in the moment. And, you know, and of course our admin teams, you know, are talking with students and families as well about it. And then thinking about, you know, the high school, and Allison mentioned, you know, programming that we have done in the high school and programming that we're continuing to do where, Principal Davenport is connecting, and collecting data and sharing with her faculty and staff and really being intentional about the PD that's happening and the conversations that are happening and, having, past facilitators come back in to do some work with our students and then represent to our faculty and staff about the conversations that they've had with students and give some tools to our faculty and staff on how to mitigate some of the instances and occurrences. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we are moving forward on it. And I think that the more we talk about it and everyone gets comfortable, addressing the issues, then, they will lessen because students and adults will hold each other accountable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Just a couple of questions. One is the executive summary available on paper for the school committee members?
Yes.
I have a hard problem
I will print it for
using
you.
computers, so that would be a great help.
What's paper?
Harley is on that.
I make him do a lot of work he doesn't have to do.
Yep.
The other thing is, are there ways, this is an early field, we're developing these, are there ways of sharing with other towns and other communities what they're coming up with, where we could learn something from, I'm thinking about, middle-class towns and Dorchester and what are they coming up with their audits that our kids could learn, I live in Westwood because of the school system. I've got 5 kids that have gone through it, 8 grandkids about to. I grew up in Norwood where most of my friends' parents didn't speak English. There's 18 languages in the elementary school in South Norwood. And I feel that was a big part of my education. I was able to get along with people in many walks of life later that made a difference. I've always wondered about my kids, the beauty of the educational system in Westwood. They're dealing with people unlike they're going to deal with in the real world. They're missing out of growing up in Dorchester, how you're going to be tough and deal with everything. Okay, so I've always wondered, are there ways of maybe addressing that issue? I have crazy ideas, like Metco, a brilliant idea. Are there ways of beginning, make it an inner city social studies teacher to come and share it, not to steal them, but to begin to explore teacher exchanges, because just so long before we hire a good diversity, but could we get diversity in another way? We send kids away to foreign countries for a year abroad. There's a way of asking some of our kids that would like an exposure to go work, go to school for a semester. Are there creative things like we can do to begin to expose our kids to more of the real world out there with other people? By what are we learning from them, but getting creative in some of these areas. But the work, I think, is wonderful. It's how can we learn more about what we can share with our kids that we're not just going to get out of our own town. But thank you so much for this work. It's very important, and whatever we can do to help support it even further, let us know. Any other questions? Okay, moving on. The dogs are ready to run. Approval of the January 19th minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Ratify the instructional assistants collective bargaining agreement, both versions.
Is there anything you want to say about this before? Or does anyone have any questions? I guess I'll ask. We all ready to vote?
I would
Okay.
just like to thank the Mass State laborers for helping to put this together, that we've come to agreement. I mean, I really want to thank them for working with us to get a plan that's good for everybody.
I just want to make a distinction that I think a lot of other towns are having some difficulty because their instructional assistants are under the same contract as teachers, right? And we have a separate.
Yeah,
here.
that's interesting.
Okay.
So you're probably hearing a lot in the news
I am.
right now about things with the MTA, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and some things happening in other towns, strikes. And yes, in many other districts, the instructional assistants are a unit that is within the the teachers' collective bargaining agreement, and so they are represented by the MTA. So when you hear some of the talking points about like a living wage and a fair contract, they're really advocating for increases for the hourly rates for instructional assistants. That isn't part of our relationship with our WTA, so they're represented by the mass laborers. Yep.
Thank you.
Could I have a motion to approve the agreement that we've had with the instructional assistants?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor of aye?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
for
all
that
the
work.
work
That
was done on that.
good.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
happy
These
that
folks.
the
Yeah,
scale
thank
was
you.
raised and we got to a great agreement with them.
Yeah.
I'm really
The-
optimistic too. It's gonna kind of help stabilize some of the staffing. I really do. That's, as Abby and I is like,
You're
hope
saying
on
that
this
with your
one.
like HR recruiter hat
Yes.
on.
I'm really trying to,
That's three out of our 5 bargaining units.
yeah.
And the laborers represent the food services group, which is the spring, so.
Yes.
Things look good there. Approval of the policy review subcommittee sections, this is not the final approval, but it's just a part of the process. And I'd like to have a motion maybe to approve to move on.
So moved.
We'll get back to see this.
Second.
Second, those in favor?
Aye.
The vote to approve the extended day rates, fiscal '24.
So we discussed these last month. Remember, Lemma brought a couple of proposals,
Yep.
and based on that discussion, she has put forth one proposal that is in your packet for the 23-24 tuition schedule.
This is what we discussed last time.
That's what we discussed last time, yes.
Any questions on this? Do I have a motion to approve the rates?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Dory and Lemma, for all.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
for
all your work
all
on
that
that.
effort to get that together.
Yes.
Vote to authorize the superintendent as a PPA signatory.
So I just want to clarify this. When we discussed all of this, you previously took a vote to support the select board going forward with the PPA. And we were under the impression that it would be just signed by the town, but it turns out that it also needs to have a signature for the school department since it impacts us as well. And we looked back to see what had happened in the past, right? So it appears that that you would need to make a motion to designate, I'm suggesting me, to sign on behalf of the district. It could be one of you or Lemma or anyone.
Could I have a vote to
I'll make a motion to
nomination?
designate the school superintendent as the authorized signatory for the district to enter into a 20-year power purchase agreement contingent upon the agreement satisfactorily meeting the needs of the district.
Have a second?
Second.
Those agreed?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. One minor item under new business, the town voted the other night to elect a poet laureate to represent the town of Westwood. And what's coming up in the very near future is a poet laureate for the high school, for the middle school, and for the elementary school. So get your kids out there writing. We already have an 8th grader who wrote a book that won an award, so
that's right.
we think
Yeah.
we have some talent out there.
Cool.
Could I have a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I also want to thank Holly. Holly, thanks for getting all of us together, organizing this, and putting up with the paperwork today.